10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, it turns out that I need to do a little more modification on these fins. After comparing it to the original fins of the V2 and trying to test fit them inside this piece here. Problem was they were bottoming out and they weren't reaching the actual tube on the inside. So they were, you can see that they're not making any noise rubbing that tube. So basically what I've done is I'm going to shim them a little bit because they really need to be glued to that tube to make some strength. If they don't, they're just going to be glued to the outside plastic, and that's not going to be very strong. So the part that's the problem is this front. I must have just cut it a little bit short. So what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of balsa here that's 1/8 by I believe 1/16, and I'm going to just put a little shim of it. I'm going to measure it here, and I'm going to clip it. Doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to even be straight on the cut. Okay. And I'm going to put this on there, and then if it seems to be way too high, then I can sand it down a little bit. But I think it'll work out just fine. So we're going to put a little bit of tight bond on there. Okay. Get this thing cleaned out. Man, this tight bond dries fast. I just used it, and it's already dry on the lid. Okay. So, again, the front piece is the one that's the issue. So I'll put a little bit of glue on there. And we'll work it in there. And then I'm just going to take the little piece here and glue it on. Okay. You can kind of see that. It's just, luckily when I cut that nice and clean with the ruler, that's coming in handy because it's perfectly straight, and this piece is now going to be glued all the way across the base there. So we'll just give it a little bit of a squeeze and we'll let that dry. And I've got one of the other ones done here, and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about with the rubbing. So all the fins, they were short on that side. So there's that piece there. And now when I put it in there, you can hear it's rubbing against the tube on the inside. Now that is going to leave a little bit of a gap here, but it's not a problem. That'll fill with the epoxy. So making sure that all of them fit correctly, even the small ones. Again, you can hear it, and they actually feel it when you move it around. So that way, everything will be just fine. So we can actually start moving to the next step. Okay, I'm ready to, after a lot of test fitting, excuse me, put the tail cone on. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually put some glue here. So that'll hold in the back of the tail here. And then glue around here, which will hold in this crease here. I did have to sand this down a little bit to make it fit a little tighter, because that glue did leave a little bit of a sort of a ridge in there, and it was not closing completely, so I did fix that. Okay, so what I need to do, the first step is to roughen up the plastic so that glue will work, hold a little better. So I'm going to use my Dremel with a little grinding bit here. I'm just going to, I know it's kind of noisy, but I'm just going to rough this up. And then I'm going to roughen the inside up where that other ring is going to go. So we'll do that, and then we'll be ready to glue. Okay, I'm ready to put some epoxy down, mix it up here. So we're going to need probably a pretty big little bump of this, because I do want this to be really secure. So we'll use a little more than I would normally use for white glue on fins and so forth. Okay. Now I am going to use a dot dash technique with the super glue as well. So we're going to do an epoxy super glue mix. So we're going to mix this up, and I'll show you what I'm going to do here in a sec. Make sure this is good mixed. If you don't, it won't dry, or will take forever to dry, and that's no good. This is the half an hour set epoxy, so we do have some time to work with it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of the epoxy, I'm going to do dots of super glue on here, about an inch apart from each other. And this way the super glue actually hold it while the epoxy is drying. So I got the super glue there, and then in between that I'm going to actually put the epoxy. Use a medium set super glue, that way it doesn't run around on you. This is medium set and it still wants to move around. So we're putting a lot of epoxy in. You can see the roughed up groove. Okay. One more space here. And we'll get ready to wipe off any of the epoxy or super glue that comes out with some Q-tips here and some alcohol. And then on this side, on the inside, doing the same thing. We'll do a dot dash technique. Okay. Just want to reinforce this really well from moving around, because it's going to support the fins as well. So in goes the epoxy. Okay, and so you can kind of see it in there. And to make sure that it's going to hold strong, I'm just going to put a little bit around the ring here. Couldn't hurt on this area. I mean, if this makes a big blob, it doesn't really hurt anything. It might add a little bit of weight, but no big deal. But we want to fill all the gaps if this spacer is not quite round. Okay, so now get that out of the way so we don't make a mess and put our hands in it. I'm going to put this in, and we're going to push it in, and I'm going to turn it so everything mixes together. And sure enough, we do have a blob there, so we're going to take a paper towel and wipe that off as quick as we can. Okay, now the thing I'm going to do is there's some epoxy all over the end here, so I'm going to just take my alcohol, 91% isopropyl alcohol, take some swabs here, and I'm just going to smooth it out, mainly just so it's cleans it up. We don't have a big ridge where when we paint it, it'll be a problem. I can actually feel a ridge there of the super glue that used out. It's already hardening. But we're going to sand this area down anyways. So let's get this area cleaned up. use another napkin. And we'll just wipe it clean and get that as smooth as we can. Like I said, there's going to be a bit of a ridge there, but we are definitely going to be strong in that area. And I also made sure that this hook is not lined up where any of the fins are. So, okay, so we're going to let that fully cure. There's plenty of epoxy down in there. I can get in there with a stick too and try to put some epoxy and reinforce that if I need. Okay, moving on to the next step. Okay, now while that engine boat tail dries, I'm going to take these fins and I'm going to start chamfering and rounding the leading edge. And for that, to make sure the leading edge is kind of exactly the way I want it, I'll sand it for about 45 degrees on either side. But I want to make sure that the leading edge is actually straight, not up and down. So the way to do that is, first of all, I want to make sure I find the front end of each piece. So, this is the front, this is the front. I already marked the other two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my green marker and I'm going to color the edge here completely on both of them. Okay. Now I'm going to take my sanding stick and I'm going to start sanding away at it, and what I'm going to do is just work slowly, and eventually I will, as you can see, it starts to move that green line in as it sands it down. Eventually I'm going to work both sides, and I want to make sure that I keep a straight little green line in the middle. Eventually it'll be just a hairline, but I want to make sure it's straight, and if it gets off a little bit I can move it by using this. So just doing each side, you can kind of see how it narrows it there. And like I said, eventually it'll just be a little small slit. So that's what we'll do. So this is what we're looking for. Give you a little tighter close-up on that, but you can see that little green line is pretty much gone. We got the 45-degree chamfers on it. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to round it over, and I'm going to do what they call breaking the edge, which is a woodworker's term, so it's not so angular. And then we'll just roll this over the top and onto the other side, and we're going to round that. I'm going to keep this flat and this flat, and we're going to actually do a reinforcing project on that next. Okay, I've got the edges all smoothed out. You can kind of see when I compare them with two of them together how that looks. And you want them curved like that, and then you can look at the airfoil shape actually there, and you can see the other, they're curved. So anyways, these being so big, when I sanding seal them they'll be stronger, but they still are pretty darn big, so I need some reinforcement. So what I've got here is I've got some carbon fiber strip, 1/8 inch wide, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put this on the trailing edge here, and I've done this with a few other rockets. I'm going to epoxy that on there and then epoxy it to the actual edge here too, just to be good to go. So what that's going to do is that's going to keep this from flexing this way, hopefully, when it lands, and works as a bumper so it doesn't split the wood that way. So what we'll do is we'll take the carbon fiber and we will measure on the piece itself. Okay, I'm just going to take my green marker and I'm going to just mark where it's going to be cut off, just right there. And then now to cut this stuff, it's really hard to cut when you cut it flat grain like this. So what I'm going to do is if you do this real hard and it does break through, this goes screaming out. It can hurt somebody. So what you want to do is you want to get it in there, and you want to get it 90 degrees pretty much to your cutters. And what you're going to do is you're going to just take and crimp it a little bit, and then you can snap it. Give it a little more of a crimp here. And actually you can even hold it here and then just, as you're cutting just rolled over, and it makes a nice smooth cut. I'm going to clean the end of it off. Sanding stick. Remeasure for the rear piece here. And it's a little long on that one, so let's try it on this one. Maybe I measured it on this one. There we go. So that's a perfect fit there. So I'm going to mix some epoxy and put that on, and I'll show you that next. Okay, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm actually going to roughen this up with some sandpaper, because it's pretty slick, and it's actually a resin coating that's keeping the fibers together, just like epoxy. Probably is epoxy. And we need to get this to bite in there real good. So we'll sand that down. Get rid of that carbon fiber dust, and then I'm going to take my epoxy here. And again, since I got half an hour to work with, I can do all these pretty much at the same time. Now I'm going to reinforce the edges of this with super glue as well, and then go over it with the sanding sealer. So there's going to be a triple thread of strength going after this stuff. Okay, so let's take the epoxy, we'll mix it together. Rolling the toothpick, making sure it's all getting where it's supposed to. We can always mix more epoxy too. So, okay. So we're going to take the epoxy, make a nice line of it here. Just making sure I don't get too much over the edge, but if I do get some, I'll clean it up with the Q-tips. But I want a good bit. It's going to soak into the wood real fast, so I can actually add another layer almost right away. Okay. So now we've got that on there. We can take our carbon fiber piece and place it in the, with the sanded side down, we're going to place it in the epoxy. Okay, now to get this to hold, I'm going to actually use some Tamiya tape, and just make sure you get this square. Putting it on the carbon fiber rod here first, and then we're going to center it and then pull it over and get it to be tight like that. I'll do about 3 or 4 different strips on there to hold it in place, and then we'll do all the other fins, and then we'll do the cap piece as well. Okay, working on the Rascal. That epoxy is dried, and those carbon fiber strips are now bonded to the wood itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully remove the tape. Okay, now, like I said, very carefully, because the fins are still fairly delicate at this stage of the game, because that balsa is so soft. But we're going to change that. Okay. Okay. Okay, now I want to check, make sure it's not loose anywhere. The epoxy didn't bond, so it looks pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this all down with a 400 grit sandpaper, and this is going to first smooth out the grain here, so it'll take the sanding sealer better. Plus it's going to actually sand this down, which we're going to put a reinforcement on. So what we'll do with that is we're going to take my medium set super glue. These may seem to be extraneous steps, but like I said, I found through the years it's best to have a strong rocket and add a little weight to it than have the super light, high-flying rocket that you can only use once because it'll break on the way down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just take a small bit of the super glue with a toothpick, and I'm going to put it in the gap of the fin and the carbon fiber. And it's thin enough it should wick in there. And this will take up any air gaps that the epoxy left behind and seal the carbon fiber in. We don't want too much because when we sand this, we're going to sand that down. We don't want a bunch of it because it's going to take a while to sand it, and then you end up sanding into this too much. So now I'm going to take a paper towel before this dries, and I'm going to quickly wipe it down, making sure that this doesn't get glued to it. So we're going to just do one swipe. Okay, you can see it actually got stuck there right away. So, okay, let's do the front or the edge of the fin cap. Okay, and again, we're just going to give it a quick wipe. Now, to make things go along a little smoother, I'm going to take some accelerator and use the little spray tube that it comes with to actually put some accelerator on this and crystallize and harden that glue immediately. Okay. So that way, once that's dry, which should take about a minute or two, we can flip it over and do the other side quickly. So it's already done its thing. So we're going to flip it over and we're going to do the other side. I'll do all the fins that way, and then we'll be ready to sand.